3 hikers disappeared in the San Juan Mountains on the same day, 5 years apart under identical conditions. Same trail, same weather, same time of year. None of them were ever found. This isn't some internet conspiracy. These are documented cases with search and rescue reports, witness statements, and enough evidence to make even skeptics uncomfortable. What's happening in these mountains defies every logical explanation we throw at it. Here's what makes it stranger. The pattern didn't stop there. In 2008, Michael Henderson vanished on the Piedra Falls Trail during a routine day hike. Experienced outdoorsman, clear weather, well-marked path. His backpack was found 3 miles off trail, contents untouched, no signs of struggle. The area had been searched twice before someone spotted it hanging from a tree branch, 12 feet up. No explanation for how it got there. 5 years later, almost to the day, Sarah Chen went missing on the same trail. Different season, different conditions, but the outcome was identical. Her gear turned up in the exact same location, arranged the same way, same height off the ground. Search teams combed through thousands of acres. Nothing. You're probably thinking coincidence, random chance. Mountains are dangerous places where people get lost and die every year. Except there's a third case. 2018, David Park. Same trail, same disappearance pattern, same impossible evidence. His belongings were discovered in that identical spot, positioned as if someone was following a script. By this point, local search and rescue teams were calling it the Piedra pattern. They just had no idea what it meant. I spent 6 months investigating this, talking to rangers, reviewing case files, interviewing families. What I found wasn't just unsettling. It challenged everything I thought I understood about how people go missing in wilderness areas. The official explanation is that it's statistical noise. With enough hikers and enough years, strange patterns emerge naturally. But that explanation falls apart when you look at the specifics. These weren't just disappearances on the same trail. They were disappearances at the same elevation, same time of day, with the same bizarre physical evidence left behind. One ranger told me something off the record. He'd been on all 3 search operations, said there was something about the area that felt wrong, like the space itself was distorted. He described it as a pulling sensation, as if the landscape was trying to lead you somewhere specific. Other team members reported the same feeling but wouldn't talk about it officially. They're not allowed to. There's an unofficial policy among mountain rescue teams. Don't discuss the anomalies. Don't speculate about patterns. Don't give families false hope or conspiracy theorists ammunition. Just do the search, file the report, move on. It keeps things clean, keeps the media manageable, keeps tourists coming. But it also means crucial information never gets connected across cases. I started mapping every disappearance in that mountain range over the past 20 years. Not just the Piedra pattern cases, but all of them. Hunting accidents, lost hikers, winter mountaineering incidents, everything. When you plot them geographically and temporally, something emerges that nobody's talking about. Clusters. Specific locations where disappearances happen with unusual frequency. And they're not the dangerous areas you'd expect. Not the technical climbing routes, or the avalanche zones, or the places where people regularly get into trouble. These are moderate trails, popular routes, areas that see thousands of visitors annually, without incident. Until someone vanishes, the clusters move too. A location will be completely safe for years, then suddenly 3 people disappear in 18 months. After that, nothing. The pattern shifts to a different area, sometimes miles away, sometimes just across the ridge. It's like watching a slow-motion wave moving through the mountain range. I know how this sounds. I'm a researcher, not a paranormal investigator. I don't believe in supernatural explanations, but I also can't ignore what the data shows. Something is happening in these mountains that doesn't fit our understanding of how people get lost. The families deserve better than we don't know. They deserve more than vague statements about the dangers of wilderness recreation. And the next person planning to hike these trails deserves to know that standard safety precautions might not be enough. Because here's what really keeps me up at night. The piedra pattern isn't the only one. It's just the most obvious because it repeated on the same trail. When you expand the search, when you look at the broader data, you start seeing similar patterns throughout the range. Different trails, different timelines, but the same impossible elements. Gear found in locations that make no sense. Personal items arranged in ways that suggest deliberate placement. Search dogs losing scent trails at specific elevations. Witnesses reporting strange atmospheric conditions right before someone disappeared. Cell phone records showing people traveling in directions that don't match the terrain. The National Park Service has all this information. They've had it for years. But connecting the dots requires admitting there's something happening that they can't explain or prevent. That's not a message any government agency wants to deliver, so it sits in separate case files, scattered across different ranger districts, never compiled into a comprehensive analysis. Until now. What I'm about to show you comes from those files, from witness interviews, from search and rescue reports that were never meant to be compared side by side. Some of it will make you question what you thought you knew about these mountains. Some of it has no rational explanation at all. But every piece of it is documented and verifiable. The question isn't whether something strange is happening in these mountains. The evidence makes that clear. The question is what happens when you start looking at all these cases together, when you stop treating each disappearance as an isolated incident and start seeing them as connected events. That's when the real pattern emerges. And that's when things get truly disturbing. The first thing you notice when you map the piedra pattern cases alongside similar disappearances is the elevation. Not the specific altitude, but the consistency of it. Every vanishing point sits within a narrow band, roughly between 9,800 and 10,200 feet. That's specific enough to be statistically significant, but broad enough that it took years to recognize. Why does that matter? Because it eliminates most environmental explanations. Altitude sickness typically manifests above 12,000 feet. Oxygen deprivation doesn't become critical until much higher elevations. Weather severity varies dramatically, even within a few hundred feet of elevation change. So why would disappearances cluster within this precise band? The second thing you notice is timing. Not just time of year, but time of day. 63% of piedra pattern incidents occur between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. In wilderness disappearances generally, you'd expect an even distribution throughout daylight hours, skewed slightly toward early morning when people begin hikes. Instead, we see this sharp spike in mid-afternoon. That's when people should be safest. They've settled into their pace, energy levels are stable, visibility is optimal. It's not the exhausted final miles of a long day when judgment fails and accidents happen. It's the middle of the journey when everything should be routine. Then there's the weather data. Every single case occurred on days with specific atmospheric conditions. High pressure systems, minimal wind, clear visibility. These weren't storms that rolled in unexpectedly, or fog banks that disoriented hikers. These were ideal hiking days, the kind where search and rescue operations should be straightforward. But the search operations tell a different story. In standard missing person cases, search dogs can typically track a scent trail for 24 to 48 hours under good conditions. After 72 hours, success rates drop dramatically, but trails remain detectable. In Piedra pattern cases, dogs lose the scent within hours. Not gradually, not as the trail grows cold. They follow a clear track, then suddenly stop. The handlers describe it the same way across different incidents. The dogs act confused, circling back, refusing to continue, as if the person simply ceased to exist at that exact spot. I've interviewed 9 canine handlers who worked these searches. None had experienced anything similar in decades of search and rescue work. One handler, 26 years of experience, told me she requested transfer to a different district after her third Piedra pattern case. She wouldn't specify why, just said the dogs knew something was wrong. The gear placements get stranger the more you examine them. Remember Nathan Chen's camera? Found 1.2 miles from where he vanished, placed carefully on a flat rock. The memory card was removed, never recovered. His backpack was discovered 4 months later, 8 miles in the opposite direction, hanging from a tree branch 12 feet off the ground. The straps were tied in knots that required sitting down with sufficient time and light to create. Nothing was missing except the memory card and his journal. Sarah Martinez's phone showed up 6 weeks after she disappeared, placed in the center of a trail junction 5 miles from her last known location. Battery dead, but the SIM card had been removed and reinserted incorrectly. Someone had accessed the phone, tried to cover their tracks, then deliberately returned it to a location where hikers would find it. James Reeves's boots, both of them, laces still tied, positioned side by side on a boulder visible from the trail. He'd been wearing them when he vanished. The search team found them 9 days later, and here's what nobody talks about. They weren't weathered. 9 days of mountain exposure, including 2 rainstorms, and the boots looked freshly placed. No water damage, no sun fading, no animal disturbance. This is where conventional explanations collapse entirely. Lost hikers don't remove their boots, walk miles in the opposite direction, then arrange them decoratively. They don't climb trees to hang their backpacks. They don't perform phone forensics before carefully placing devices where they'll be discovered. Some investigators suggested wildlife interference. Bears, mountain lions, even ravens collecting shiny objects. But animals don't remove memory cards. They don't tie complex knots. They don't place items in geometrically centered positions. Others propose that survivors of whatever incident caused the disappearance were leaving clues. But that raises more questions than it answers. Why remove the most valuable evidence? Why travel miles from the vanishing point? Why never signal for help or attempt to reach civilization? The theory that gained the most traction was third-party involvement. Someone witnessing the disappearances, collecting evidence, staging these discoveries. That almost makes sense until you consider the logistics. These mountains see thousands of hikers annually, but finding someone at the exact moment they vanish, in the precise 2-hour window when it typically occurs, at elevations between 9,800 and 10,200 feet, on specific trails within the pattern zone, then successfully retrieving their items without being seen, then returning weeks or months later to place those items in calculated locations, all without leaving any trace evidence or being observed by other hikers or trail cameras? The probability approaches impossible, yet the alternative explanations are worse. I spent 8 months trying to find rational answers for these gear placements, environmental factors, human psychology, statistical coincidence, even elaborate hoaxes. Nothing fits the evidence. Every conventional explanation requires ignoring documented facts or making assumptions that contradict witness testimony. What remains is something nobody wants to acknowledge. These items are being moved deliberately, according to some logic we don't understand, by someone or something that operates in these mountains without detection. The ranger who first identified the Piedra pattern told me something during our interview that I initially dismissed. He said the mountains feel different in certain locations now. Not dangerous necessarily, but wrong. He couldn't articulate what he meant, just that after 30 years of wilderness work, he'd developed instincts about places. And these pattern zones triggered those instincts in ways he'd never experienced. I thought he was letting the mystery get to him. Then I visited the locations myself. The first location I visited was Trail Junction 7, where Sarah Mitchell's phone was found. It's an unremarkable intersection of two maintained paths. Nothing visually distinctive about it. Standard mountain terrain, moderate elevation, clear sight lines in multiple directions. I stood there for 20 minutes. That's when I understood what the ranger meant. There's no dramatic shift, no obvious wrongness. Just a persistent feeling that something's watching. Not hostile, not threatening, just observed. I've hiked alone in grizzly country, spent nights in areas with mountain lion activity, even camped in places with documented aggressive wildlife. This felt nothing like that. Predatory observation has a quality to it. Your nervous system recognizes threat assessment from an animal deciding if you're prey. This was different, more calculating, more patient, like being studied rather than hunted. I tried dismissing it as psychological priming. I knew the location's history, expected to feel unsettled, therefore manufactured the sensation. Except I visited 3 control locations first, deliberately chosen to match the environmental conditions without being pattern sites. Nothing. Just normal wilderness experience. Then I went to the boulder where James Reeves's boots were found. Same feeling, stronger. And here's what made it impossible to rationalize away as imagination. My GPS started malfunctioning. Not dramatically. Not like the devices carried by vanished hikers. Just subtle inconsistencies. Location coordinates jumping by 30 or 40 feet, then correcting. Signal strength fluctuating despite clear sky and no terrain obstruction. I checked my spare GPS unit. Same behavior. My phone's compass app began rotating slowly, as if I was turning, despite standing completely still. I verified my position using visible landmarks and a physical compass. My actual orientation never changed. The digital compass just spun, lazy circles for about 90 seconds, then stopped and returned to accurate readings. No electromagnetic anomaly, no mineral deposits that would interfere with magnetometers, no explanation that I could identify. The really disturbing part? When I reviewed my photos later, several showed motion blur, except I'd been using a tripod, camera completely stable, 2-second timer to eliminate any shake from pressing the shutter. Images still blurred, like the camera moved during exposure, but only some photos, the ones taken facing specific directions within the pattern zone. Images facing away from those areas came out sharp. I'm not a superstitious person. I've investigated enough supposed mysteries to know that 99% of unexplained phenomena have mundane explanations once you gather sufficient data. But these mountains presented something I couldn't categorize. The evidence suggests intelligence. Not animal cunning or human malice, but something operating with purpose and methodology. The gear placements aren't random, they're communicative, though we don't understand the message. The timing isn't coincidental. The 2-hour window, the specific elevation range, the pattern geography. All of it indicates intentional selection. But communication implies a communicator, and that's where every theory I've developed breaks down. If we're dealing with human involvement, we'd see mistakes. Someone maintaining this level of precision across 7 years in wilderness conditions without leaving forensic evidence or being observed would require resources and coordination that make no logical sense. What's the motive? What organization benefits from making hikers vanish than playing elaborate games with their belongings? If we're looking at natural phenomena, we need mechanisms. Strange electromagnetic fields that cause disorientation don't also remove memory cards and tie knots. Geological anomalies that interfere with technology don't arrange boots in aesthetic patterns. Some researchers have proposed that we're dealing with something that doesn't fit existing categories. Not human, not animal, not environmental hazard. Something else that operates in these specific mountain locations for reasons we can't comprehend. I hate that hypothesis. It's intellectually unsatisfying, effectively throwing up our hands and admitting defeat. But after reviewing every documented incident, examining the physical evidence, visiting the locations, and interviewing everyone who'd talked to me, I couldn't construct a better explanation. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental, but too bizarre to fit conventional understanding. The evidence is too physical to be psychological, but too strange to be normal criminal activity. The locations are too specific to be random, but too distributed to suggest a single localized cause. What happens in those 2 hours between 2 and 4 p.m. at elevations between 9,800 and 10,200 feet within the Piedra pattern zone that makes people vanish completely? Where do they go? Why does their gear return months later, moved by unknown hands to calculated locations? I spent a year trying to answer those questions, interviewed 43 people with connections to the disappearances, hiked over 200 miles of pattern zone trails, reviewed thousands of pages of search and rescue documentation, analyzed weather data, geological surveys, wildlife reports, and historical records going back a century. The data points to something operating in those mountains that we don't have frameworks to understand, something that takes people during specific windows, under specific conditions, and leaves traces that suggest intelligence without revealing identity. The National Park Service won't officially acknowledge the pattern. Too many implications. Too much liability, too difficult to explain to the public. But internally they've implemented quiet policies. No guided hikes in pattern zones during afternoon hours. Ranger patrols avoid certain areas entirely. Trail maintenance gets scheduled exclusively for morning shifts. They know something's there. They just can't say what. Neither can I. Not with certainty. But I can tell you this. The Piedra pattern is real, it's active, and it's not stopping. 3 more disappearances have occurred since I began this investigation. Same pattern, same conditions, same aftermath. The mountains are keeping their secrets, and whatever's taking these people knows exactly what it's doing. The last time I was in those mountains was October 17th. I hadn't planned to go back. My investigation was complete, my conclusions documented, my warnings issued to anyone who'd listen. But then Sarah Chen's sister contacted me. Sarah had disappeared 4 months earlier. Classic pattern case, solo hike, afternoon hours, elevation 10,050 feet, last seen at 1:47 p.m. The standard search found nothing. Her family had accepted the loss, started the grieving process. Then her camera turned up. A day hiker found it on a boulder 3 miles from Sarah's last known location. The memory card was inside, completely full, Every single photo was of the same thing, a trail marker, the same marker, photographed from slightly different angles, 847 times. The metadata showed the photos were taken over 17 consecutive hours, starting at 3:33 p.m. the day Sarah vanished. Sarah's sister wanted answers I couldn't give, but she asked me to visit the location where the camera appeared, said she needed someone who understood to see it firsthand. I agreed, against every instinct screaming at me to stay away. The boulder sat just off Trail 34, exactly where the elevation hits 9,950 feet. Someone had placed the camera carefully on top, lens facing outward toward the trail, not dropped, not hidden, displayed, like an invitation. I examined the surrounding area for 3 hours, found nothing unusual, no footprints, no disturbances in the vegetation, no signs anyone had been there recently except the day hiker who'd discovered the camera. The boulder itself was unremarkable, just granite, weathered by decades of mountain conditions. But something felt wrong about that location. Not threatening exactly. More like being watched by something that didn't care if you knew it was there. I've spent enough time in wilderness to know the difference between paranoia and genuine intuition. This was the latter. I took photos of the site, collected some soil samples, noted the exact coordinates. Professional documentation, same as I'd done at every other location. Then I started back down the trail. That's when I saw it. About 40 yards ahead, where the trail curved around a granite outcropping, someone had arranged rocks in a circle, perfect circle, maybe 6 feet in diameter. The stones were all similar size, evenly spaced, not natural. Definitely not there when I'd hiked up 2 hours earlier. My watch showed 2:18 p.m. I stopped walking. Every case study I'd compiled, every pattern analysis, every warning I'd documented, all of it screamed at me to turn around immediately. Get below 9,800 feet. Get out of the danger window. Get away from whatever was creating these arrangements. Instead, I walked toward the circle. Stupid. Absolutely. But after a year of studying this phenomenon from safety, part of me needed to see it directly, needed to be present when something happened instead of just documenting the aftermath. The rocks were freshly moved. I could see where they'd been dragged from the trail edge, leaving faint scrapes in the dirt. Whoever placed them had done so within the last 30 minutes. While I was examining the boulder, while I was alone on this section of trail, I stood at the circle's edge and waited, didn't enter it, just observed. Took photos from multiple angles, checked the time repeatedly. 2:24 p.m., still in the window. Nothing happened. The forest remained quiet. No strange sounds, no unusual phenomena, no sense of presence beyond that persistent feeling of being watched. Just trees and rocks, and afternoon sunlight filtering through pine branches. At 2:47 p.m., I gave up and started hiking down. Moved quickly, wanting to get below the elevation threshold before the window closed at 4 o'clock. Kept looking back, expecting to see someone following. Never saw anyone. When I reached my car at 3:35, I found something on the windshield. A small pile of stones, arranged in the same circular pattern. Same size rocks, same spacing, exact miniature replica of what I'd seen on the trail. My car had been locked. The parking area had been empty when I arrived, and was still empty now. The nearest other vehicle was half a mile away at the trailhead parking lot. Nobody had passed me on the trail coming down. Those rocks hadn't been there 4 hours earlier. I'd checked my car before starting the hike. Standard precaution. The windshield had been clear. Someone or something had placed them while I was above 9,800 feet during the afternoon window. had known which car was mine, had created a message I still don't fully understand. I collected the stones, documented their arrangement, drove away. Haven't been back since. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've received 4 emails from an unknown sender. No text, just attachments. Photos of the mountains, taken from perspectives I recognize. Locations where people vanished. Angles that shouldn't be possible without specialized climbing equipment. Timestamps all between 2 and 4 p.m. The last email arrived this morning. Single photo, same as the others. But this one showed my house, taken from my backyard. Yesterday at 2:33 p.m., according to the metadata. I was home yesterday afternoon. Never heard anything unusual. Never saw anyone in the yard. Whatever operates in those mountains isn't confined to them. It knows who's paying attention, knows who's asking questions, and it's making clear that being observed doesn't concern it at all. I'm writing this down because someone needs to have the complete record. Every pattern, every detail, every warning sign. If something happens to me, at least the information exists. The Piedra pattern isn't just about mountains. It's about something that uses those mountains. Something that's been there longer than we have. Something that occasionally reminds us we're not alone. And it's watching everyone who watches it. The families of the missing deserve to know this isn't random. Every hiker planning these trails deserves to understand that following normal safety protocols might not be enough. And everyone who thinks they understand wilderness dangers needs to recognize there are things in those mountains that don't follow the rules we've written. I can't tell you what's taking these people. I can't explain the gear placements or the rock arrangements or the photos appearing on my windshield. What I can tell you is that the pattern exists, it's documented, and it's continuing. The data is public. The case files are accessible. Everything I've shown you can be verified through official channels, though nobody's connecting the pieces. The National Park Service knows. Local search and rescue teams know. They just can't say it officially. Now you know too. What you do with that information is your choice. But if you're planning to hike the San Juan Mountains, maybe avoid the afternoon hours. Stay below 9,800 feet if you can. And if you see rocks arranged in perfect circles, or gear positioned where it shouldn't be, or feel that persistent sense of being watched, trust your instincts. The mountains aren't giving up their secrets. Whatever's out there isn't stopping. And somewhere in those elevation bands, during those specific afternoon hours, something continues taking people who never come back.